The war had lasted 1 year. 1 year since the Vorthak had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. 1 year since they had expected to wipe out another weak species in a matter of days. Now, Admiral Kethmore stood in the ruins of his command center, staring at a message that would have been impossible to imagine 12 months ago. "Admiral," his communication officer said quietly, "the message is confirmed. It comes from the Vorthak High Command." Kethmore read the words again, hoping they would change, but they remained the same. The Vorthak Empire was requesting a ceasefire. They were asking for peace talks. They were offering to negotiate with humans. "How many ships do we have left?" he asked. 47, sir, out of the original 300. "And the humans?" "Their fleet has grown to over 200 ships. All of them using our own technology, but modified in ways our engineers say should be impossible." Kethmore closed his 4 eyes. The humans had not just survived the Vorthak assault. They had used it as a training exercise. Every ship they lost had taught them something new. Every battle had made them stronger. Every defeat had become a victory. In the peace negotiation chamber on the human station orbiting Earth, representatives from both species sat across from each other. The Vorthak delegation looked broken. Their perfect armor was dented. Their confident posture was gone. They sat like prisoners waiting for judgment. General Jin-Ha Kim entered the room slowly. His body bore the scars of a year of impossible battles. His left eye was gone, lost in a boarding action on a Vorthak dreadnought. His right arm had been broken so many times that it barely moved. But his remaining eye burned with the fire that had kept humanity fighting when the entire galaxy said they should surrender. "You asked for peace," he said simply. Admiral Kethmore nodded. "We offer you everything: technology, resources, territory, information about the galaxy. All we ask is that you stop fighting." Jin-Ha sat down across from him. "Stop fighting? We're just getting started." "Please," Kethmore said, and the words sounded strange coming from a Vorthak. "We know we cannot defeat you. We know we made a mistake. We will give you whatever you want." "What we want," Jin-Ha said slowly, "is for you to understand what you did wrong. We underestimated you. No, you made a bigger mistake than that." Jin-Ha leaned forward. "You assumed that being primitive meant being weak. You assumed that being small meant being helpless. You assumed that being forgotten meant being harmless." Kethmore listened in silence. "But the biggest mistake you made," Jin-Ha continued, "was thinking that we would stay the same. You thought we were a fixed species. You thought we couldn't change. You thought we couldn't grow." He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, human ships moved in formations that defied every known law of military tactics. They moved like living things, adapting and changing in real time. "You want to know what humans are capable of?" Jin-Ha asked. "We are the species that doesn't know when to quit. We are the species that turns every disaster into an opportunity. We are the species that evolves while you're fighting us." Dr. Harin Park entered the room carrying a datapad. She had spent the year documenting humanity's impossible transformation. What she had discovered would change how the galaxy thought about evolution forever. "The human genome has stabilized," she announced. "The changes are permanent. They will be passed to our children." "What changes?" Kethmore asked. "Faster reflexes, greater strength, enhanced intelligence, improved sensory systems, but most importantly, greater adaptability. We can now change our tactics, our technology, our entire approach to warfare in real time." She showed him the data. "Your species spent millions of years becoming perfect predators. But you became so perfect that you stopped growing. You stopped adapting. You became predictable. And you? We became your perfect prey. Then we became your perfect enemy. And now we are becoming something else entirely." The door opened and engineer Quan Li entered the room. He had been working on humanity's latest project, something that would ensure the galaxy never forgot what had happened here. "The weapon is ready," he announced. "What weapon?" Kethmore asked with new fear in his voice. "Not a weapon to destroy," Quan explained. A weapon to create? We call it the Liberation Engine. He activated a holographic display. It showed a device that looked like a combination of human and Vorthak technology. But it was something entirely new. It broadcasts a signal that breaks psionic control, Quan continued. It frees species from hive mind domination. It gives them back their individual will. Kethmer's eyes widened in horror. You're going to free our slave species. We're going to free everyone, Jinha said firmly. Every species you've conquered. Every world you've enslaved. Every civilization you've destroyed. We're going to give them back their freedom. But that will destroy the empire. Yes, Jinha said simply. That's the point. The peace talks continued for 3 days. The Vorthak offered everything they had. Star maps, advanced technology, tribute, military alliance, but the humans had only one demand. Free everyone, Jinha repeated. Every slave, every conquered world. Every species under your control. Give them back their freedom, and we'll let you live. And if we refuse, Jinha smiled, but it was not a kind smile, then we'll free them ourselves, and we'll do it the hard way. The Vorthak delegation knew they had no choice. They had seen what humans were capable of when they were angry. They had no desire to see what humans were capable of when they were righteous. The Liberation Engine was activated 6 months later. The signal spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. On 17 conquered worlds, billions of enslaved beings suddenly found themselves free. The Vorthak Empire collapsed in a single day. Some of the freed worlds joined the growing human federation. Others declared independence. A few tried to rebuild their old civilizations, but all of them remembered who had freed them. All of them remembered the species that had refused to surrender. The galaxy had changed forever. The Vorthak, once the most feared species in known space, became refugees. Some were accepted by the worlds they had once conquered. Others were not. But all of them lived with the knowledge that they had created their own destroyers. Dr. Harin's final report to the Galactic Federation contained a warning that would be studied for generations. Humanity doesn't just survive extinction events. They use them as stepping stones to greatness. They are not the weakest species in the galaxy. They are the species that pretends to be weak until they no longer need to pretend. Years passed. The Human Federation grew. New species made contact with humanity, but they approached with respect rather than dismissal. The galaxy had learned that humans were not to be underestimated. The Vorthak became a cautionary tale. The species that had ruled through fear, defeated by a species that had learned to conquer fear itself. And in the depths of space, human ships continued to patrol the stars. Not as conquerors, but as guardians. They carried a simple message to anyone who would listen. We are humanity. We welcome you to the galaxy. Please make yourselves at home. And whatever you do, don't make us angry. The galaxy had forgotten humanity's name. Now it would never forget it again. Jinha Kim, now Admiral of the Human Fleet, stood on the bridge of humanity's newest ship. It was built with technology that combined human creativity with alien science. It was faster than any Vorthak vessel, more flexible than any Federation cruiser, and more adaptable than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Sir, his communication officer reported, we're receiving a distress signal from the Andromeda sector. A new species is threatening the local worlds. Jinha smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had learned to enjoy the hunt. Set course for Andromeda. Let's go introduce ourselves. The ship disappeared into hyperspace, carrying humanity's message to a new corner of the galaxy. The message was simple. We are humanity. We are here. And we are ready for whatever comes next. The galaxy had awakened a sleeping giant. And that giant was just getting started. The emergency session of the United Earth Council had been going for 6 hours. The Great Hall in Geneva buzzed with panicked voices. Representatives from every nation sat around the circular table, their faces pale with fear. The Vorthak message had been broadcast to the entire world. 72 hours to surrender or face extinction. President Martinez of the Americas slammed his hand on the table. We have to surrender. Did you see what they did to the Zellian homeworld? 17 star. Systems have fallen to them. We can't fight beings like that. They're monsters, whispered Ambassador Chun from the Asian Federation. Their ships are the size of cities. Their weapons can crack planets. What chance do we have? Dr. Harin Park sat quietly in the corner studying her tablet. As Earth's leading expert on alien biology, she had been called to advise the Council, but no one was listening to her. They were too busy arguing about surrender terms. We need to discuss what we can offer them, said Chancellor Weber from the European Union. Maybe they'll let us live if we give them our resources. Our people can be slaves, but at least they'll be alive. Slaves? General Jin-Ha Kim stood up from his seat. His military uniform was perfectly pressed, but his eyes burned with anger. You want to make our children slaves? What choice do we have? President Martinez shot back. Look at the data. They have conquered civilizations far more advanced than us. They have weapons we can't even imagine. They have armies that have never been defeated. General Kim walked to the center of the room. He was not a tall man, but his presence filled the space. I've read the reports. I know what they've done. But I also know something else. What? Chancellor Weber asked. We don't surrender. We've never been good at it. The room erupted in angry voices. Be realistic. You'll get us all killed. This isn't a human war. General Kim waited for the noise to die down. Dr. Park, he said, turning to the quiet woman in the corner. Tell them what you found. Harin looked up from her tablet. She had been studying the Vorthic for hours, using every piece of data the Galactic Federation had shared decades ago. They're not invincible, she said quietly. What did you say? President Martinez leaned forward. They're not invincible, Harin repeated, louder this time. They're dangerous, yes. Powerful, yes, but they have weaknesses. She stood up and activated the holographic display. The image of a Vorthic warrior appeared in the center of the room. Its chitinous armor gleamed, its 4 eyes glowed with menace. Its claws could tear through steel. They evolved on a world of constant war, Harin explained. Their bodies are living weapons, but that evolution came with a price. They think like weapons. They fight like weapons. They are predictable? Predictable? Ambassador Chun laughed bitterly. They've conquered 17 star systems. Yes, but how? Harin asked. Look at their battle records. Every single conquest followed the same pattern. They arrive in overwhelming force. They demand surrender. The enemy either gives up immediately or fights a conventional battle. The Vorthak win because they're stronger and better armed. She changed the display to show battle formations. They use the same tactics every time, the same ship formations, the same attack patterns. They've never had to change because no one has ever forced them to. General Kim nodded. They're like a boxer who's never been hit back. They don't know how to adapt. There's more, Harin continued. They have a hive mind structure. They communicate through pheromones and psychic links. This makes them incredibly coordinated, but it also makes them vulnerable. Disrupt their communication and they become confused. So what? President Martinez demanded. We don't have weapons that can disrupt psychic links. We don't need them, Harin said with a small smile. We have something better. What? We have chaos. The room fell silent. Harin expanded the display to show human history. Wars, battles, conflicts spanning thousands of years. Look at how we fight, she said. We don't have standard tactics. We don't have predictable patterns. We improvise, we adapt. We do things that make no sense to anyone else, including ourselves. She showed images from human wars. Cavalry charges against machine guns. Pilots ramming their planes into enemy ships. Soldiers fighting with broken weapons and empty magazines. We fight dirty, we fight stupid, we fight when we should run. We run when we should fight. We make decisions that no logical military computer would ever make. And sometimes, that's exactly what wins wars, General Kim smiled grimly. The Vorthak have conquered species that fight like them. They've never fought a species that fights like us. This is insane, Chancellor Weber protested. You're talking about fighting the most powerful military force in the galaxy. No, Harin said quietly. We're talking about fighting the most predictable military force in the galaxy. The debate continued for another hour, but something had changed. The talk of surrender grew quieter. The questions about fighting grew louder. Finally, the Secretary General called for a vote. All in favor of surrender? 7 hands went up, less than half. All in favor of resistance? The rest of the hands rose slowly. General Kim's first, then Harin's, then others one by one. The motion to resist carries, the Secretary General announced. God help us all. The 72-hour deadline was approaching. Around the world, people gathered in their homes, in their churches, in their streets. They watched the news. They held their families. They waited in military bases across the globe. Soldiers prepared for a war they couldn't win. In laboratories, scientists worked frantically on weapons that might make a difference. In space, the small human colonies received emergency broadcasts. Prepare for war. Do not surrender. Fight with everything you have. As the final hour approached, the Vorthak fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system. Hundreds of massive ships, each one bristling with weapons. They moved in perfect formation, confident in their superiority. Admiral Kethmar opened a communication. Channel to Earth. Your time is up, humans. Have you prepared your surrender? The response came not from the government, but from a simple military radio operator in a bunker beneath Geneva. Her voice was calm, almost bored. This is Earth to Vorthak Fleet. Message received. Here's our answer. The transmission switched to a pre-recorded message. General Kim's voice filled the void of space, reaching every Vorthak ship, every alien monitoring station, every corner of the galaxy. We are humanity. We are the species that turned wolves into dogs and deserts into gardens. We are the species that split the atom and touched the stars. We are the species that has never met a problem we couldn't solve or an enemy we couldn't outlast. The message continued, broadcast on every frequency in every language. You want to know what we're capable of? You want to see what happens when you threaten our children? Come and find out. We do not yield. We do not break. We do not surrender. We are humanity, and we are ready for war. The transmission ended. Space fell silent. In his command ship, Admiral Kethmar stared at the communication console. No species had ever responded to a Vorthak ultimatum like this. Every other race had either surrendered immediately or pleaded for mercy. These humans had declared war on the most feared empire in the galaxy. Sir? His second-in-command asked nervously. Your orders? Kethmar's 4 eyes glowed with rage. Destroy them all, leave nothing alive. Make them an example that will terrify the galaxy for 1,000 years. The Vorthak fleet began to move toward Earth, but they were no longer facing a species that would fight by their rules. They were facing humanity, and humanity had rules of its own. The war was about to begin. The Vorthak fleet approached the outer edge of the solar system like a swarm of metal death. Admiral Kethmar stood on his command bridge, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. His scanners showed the pathetic human defenses. A few dozen ships, some orbital stations, mining platforms around asteroids. This will be over in minutes, he told his officers. Ready all weapons. Target their ships first, then their stations, then their homeworld. But something was wrong. The human ships were not moving to intercept. They were not forming battle lines. They were not even powering up their weapons. Instead, they were scattering. Admiral, his tactical officer reported. The human vessels are retreating toward their asteroid belt. They appear to be abandoning their outer colonies. Kethmar laughed. Cowards, they run before we even fire a shot. This is easier than I thought, but Engineer Quan Li was not running. He was waiting. Hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid, he watched the Vorthak fleet approach through his makeshift sensors. His hands moved quickly over controls that he had built himself from salvaged alien technology and human ingenuity. Quan had been working in secret for years. When the Galactic Federation had first contacted Earth, they had left behind some broken equipment. Pieces of their ships, fragments of their technology. Everyone else had studied these artifacts in museums. Quan had studied them in his workshop. He had learned to read alien computer languages. He had figured out how their energy systems worked. He had combined their technology with human engineering in ways that made no sense to anyone else, but they worked. "This is Quan to all units," he whispered into his radio. "The trap is set. Wait for my signal." The Vorthak fleet entered the asteroid belt confidently. They had fought in asteroid fields before. Their sensors could track every rock larger than a car. Their weapons could destroy anything that moved. There was nowhere for the humans to hide. "Admiral," the sensor operator called out, "I'm detecting some unusual readings from the asteroids." "Define unusual," Kethmore ordered. "Energy signatures. But they single quotes read ... strange, like nothing in our databases." Kethmore studied the display. The asteroids showed faint energy readings, but nothing that looked like weapons. "Probably their mining equipment. Ignore it. Continue the advance." That was his first mistake. The Vorthak ships moved deeper into the asteroid belt, their formations perfect, their tactics flawless. They were following the same attack pattern they had used successfully for 50 years. Advance in formation. Destroy all resistance. Claim victory. "Now," Quan whispered, the asteroids came alive. What the Vorthak thought were mining platforms were actually hidden weapon systems. What they thought were empty rocks were actually camouflaged ships. What they thought were abandoned stations were actually traps. The first explosion caught the Vorthak completely by surprise. A massive asteroid split open like a flower, revealing a human ship inside. But this was not a normal ship. Quan had built it using Vorthak technology stolen from old crash sites. It fired energy beams that the Vorthak armor couldn't stop. "Impossible," Kethmore roared. "How do they have our weapons?" More asteroids opened, more hidden ships appeared. The humans had turned the entire asteroid belt into a giant ambush. But they were not fighting like any other species the Vorthak had encountered. Captain Jinha Kim commanded the lead human ship. His vessel was tiny compared to the Vorthak cruisers, but it moved like a fighter. It dodged between asteroids, using them as cover. It fired at the Vorthak ships, then disappeared behind rocks before they could fire back. "This is insane!" His second-in-command shouted over the noise of battle. "We're attacking ships 100 times our size." "I know," Jinha replied calmly. "Isn't it wonderful?" The Vorthak tried to respond with their standard tactics. They formed defensive formations. They concentrated their fire. They followed their training perfectly. But the humans were not following any training at all. Human ships rammed into Vorthak vessels and exploded, taking out engines and weapons. Miners used their industrial equipment as weapons, drilling into Vorthak hulls and filling them with toxic gas. Cargo ships loaded with explosives flew straight at enemy command centers. "They're using their own ships as missiles." A Vorthak officer screamed. "They're fighting like they want to die." Another added, but the humans were not trying to die. They were trying to win. And they were willing to sacrifice everything to do it. The battle raged for hours. The Vorthak had superior numbers, better weapons, and stronger ships. But they had never fought an enemy that used such insane tactics. Every time they adapted to one human strategy, the humans tried something completely different. Dr. Harin Park worked frantically in her laboratory on Earth. She had been studying the Vorthak communication systems, looking for ways to disrupt them. The answer came to her in a flash of inspiration. "They use pheromone communication," she muttered to herself. "Chemical signals, but what if we flood their ships with the wrong chemicals?" She began broadcasting on the same frequencies the Vorthak used for coordination. But instead of military commands, she sent something else: human music, death metal, heavy bass, sounds that made the Vorthak writhe in pain. What is that noise? Admiral Kethmore demanded, covering his audio receptors. It's coming from the human ships, his communication officer reported. They're jamming our frequencies with ... With what? With something they call music, Admiral? It's causing neural disruption in our crew. The Vorthek warriors began to lose coordination. Their perfect formations broke apart. Their hive-mind communication failed. For the first time in their species' history, they were confused. Jinha saw the opportunity immediately. All ships, attack now, they're blind. The human fleet struck like a hammer. Ships that had been hiding in the asteroid belt suddenly appeared from every direction. They swarmed the confused Vorthek vessels, attacking from angles that made no tactical sense. Quan's hidden weapons platforms opened fire at the same time. Energy beams crisscrossed the space between asteroids. The Vorthek fleet found itself caught in a crossfire of their own weapons, modified and improved by human engineering. But the humans were not done. They had one more surprise. Boarding parties, launch, Jinha commanded. Small human ships, barely larger than shuttles, flew straight at the Vorthak vessels. They crashed into airlocks, hull breaches, and weapon ports. Human soldiers poured out, armed with modified mining equipment and wearing cobbled-together armor. The Vorthek warriors were perfect killing machines in open combat, but they had never fought inside their own ships. They had never faced enemies who used power tools as weapons. They had never battled opponents who seemed to feel no fear. They're inside our ships? A Vorthek captain screamed over the radio. They're using industrial equipment to cut through our bulkheads. They're in the engine rooms, another reported. They're sabotaging our power systems. They're everywhere, a third voice added. How are there so many of them? The answer was simple. The humans had been preparing for this war from the moment they received the ultimatum. Every mining colony had been turned into a military base. Every civilian had been trained to fight. Every piece of equipment had been modified into a weapon. The Vorthak had expected to fight a few thousand human soldiers. Instead, they were fighting millions of human civilians who had decided that dying free was better than living as slaves. The battle that was supposed to last minutes had stretched into hours. The Vorthak fleet that had entered the asteroid belt in perfect formation was now scattered and confused. Their ships were damaged. Their crews were panicking. Their perfect military machine was falling apart. Admiral Kethmore stared at his tactical display in disbelief. How had this happened? How had these primitive humans turned his certain victory into a nightmare? Sir, his second-in-command whispered, perhaps we should withdraw and regroup. Withdraw? Kethmore's voice was filled with rage. The Vorthak do not withdraw. We are the apex predators of the galaxy. But even as he spoke, he knew something had changed. The humans had done something impossible. They had made the Vorthak feel fear, and in the cold depths of space, the human fleet prepared for the next phase of their impossible war. 3 months had passed since the battle in the asteroid belt. The war that Admiral Kethmore had promised would end in hours had become a nightmare that seemed to have no end. The Vorthak Empire, rulers of 17 star systems, was losing to a species they had dismissed as primitive insects. In the medical bay of his flagship, Kethmore stared at the reports from his field commanders. The numbers made no sense. The Vorthak had lost more ships in 3 months of fighting humans than they had lost in 50 years of conquering the galaxy. How is this possible? He muttered, his 4 eyes dim with exhaustion. Dr. Haran Park stood in her laboratory on Earth, studying genetic samples that should not exist. The blood samples came from human soldiers who had been fighting for months. What she saw under the microscope made her hands shake. This is impossible, she whispered. But the evidence was right there in front of her. The human soldiers were changing. Their reflexes were faster. Their strength was greater. Their pain tolerance was beyond anything she had seen before. The constant warfare was triggering something in human DNA that had been sleeping for thousands of years. General Kim, she called on her radio, you need to see this. Jinha arrived at her lab an hour later. His uniform was torn and stained with blood. His left arm was in a sling from his latest boarding action, but his eyes still burned with the fire that had kept humanity fighting when everyone said they should surrender. "What have you found?" he asked. Haran showed him the genetic data. "The war is changing us. Physically, mentally, we're adapting to combat conditions faster than should be possible." "Adapting how? Look at these scans." She pulled up brain images from soldiers who had been fighting for months. "Their neural pathways are rewiring themselves. They're thinking faster, reacting quicker, processing battlefield information at superhuman speeds." Jinha studied the data. "Are you saying we're evolving?" "I'm saying we're becoming something new, something that can fight the Vorthak on equal terms." But it was not just the soldiers who were changing. On mining colonies throughout the solar system, human children born during the war were displaying abilities that defied explanation. They could see in near darkness. They could hear frequencies that normal humans could not detect. They could calculate complex trajectories in their heads. The war was not just changing individual humans. It was changing the entire species. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, something else was happening. The Vorthak Empire was fracturing. On the conquered world of Zelios, rebel groups had emerged from hiding. They had heard about the humans who refused to surrender. They had seen footage of tiny human ships ramming massive Vorthak cruisers. They had listened to the broadcasts from Earth that said, "We do not yield, we do not break." "If these humans can fight the Vorthak," the rebel leader whispered to his followers, "then so can we." Similar uprisings began on 6 other worlds. The Vorthak had ruled through fear for 50 years. But the humans had shown the galaxy that the Vorthak could bleed, they could be defeated. They could be driven back. Admiral Kethmore received the reports with growing horror. His empire was falling apart. Not from military defeat, but from something worse. Hope. "The humans have given them hope," he told his second-in-command. "They have shown the galaxy that we are not invincible. What are your orders, Admiral?" "Crush the rebellions, use all necessary force. Make examples that will terrify the galaxy into submission." But the Vorthak forces were stretched thin. Too many ships were trapped in the solar system, fighting a war that made no sense. Every time they adapted to human tactics, the humans changed their strategy. Every time they thought they had won a battle, the humans turned defeat into victory. In the engineering bay of a human space station, Quan Li worked on his most ambitious project yet. He had been studying Vorthak psychology, learning how their minds worked. He had discovered something interesting. The Vorthak were perfect predators, but they had one weakness. They had never learned to deal with fear. Their entire species had evolved to inspire terror in others. They had never experienced true terror themselves. "If we can make them afraid," Quan muttered to himself, "we can break them." He had been working on a new weapon, not something that would destroy Vorthak ships, but something that would destroy Vorthak minds. A psychological weapon that would turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The weapon was ready 3 weeks later. It looked like a normal communication device, but it was actually a nightmare made real. The first test came during a battle near Jupiter. Jinha's fleet was outnumbered 3-1. The Vorthak ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons charged, their crews confident of victory. "Activate the device," Jinha ordered. Quan's weapon came online. It began broadcasting on all Vorthak communication frequencies. But instead of jamming their signals, it transmitted something else: the screams of dying Vorthak soldiers, the sound of their ships being torn apart, the voices of their crews begging for mercy. But these were not recordings from the current battle. These were the death screams of Vorthak who had died in previous battles, captured and stored by human listening devices. Now they were being broadcast to every Vorthak ship in the fleet. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Vorthak warriors heard their own people dying in agony. They heard the sound of their invincible empire being torn apart by primitive humans. They heard their own mortality screaming at them through the darkness of space. "Turn it off," Admiral Kethmore commanded. But his communication officer was frozen with terror. The sounds of dying Vorthak filled every speaker on every ship. For the first time in their history, the Vorthak felt what their victims had felt. Terror, despair, the knowledge that they could die, the perfect military. Formation fell apart. Ships broke ranks and fled. Warriors abandoned their posts. The species that had conquered the galaxy through fear was now paralyzed by fear. Jinha's fleet struck like lightning. They destroyed half the Vorthak ships before the enemy could even respond. The survivors retreated in panic, their minds shattered by the sounds of their own death. "Sir," Jinha's communication officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from 12 Vorthak ships." Surrender? Jinha could not believe. They want to surrender to us? Yes, sir. They're saying they cannot continue fighting. For the first time in the war, Jinha smiled. Tell them we'll accept their surrender. But they have to do something for us first. What, sir? They have to broadcast a message to their home fleet. They have to tell them what it feels like to be afraid. The surrendering Vorthak ships did as they were commanded. They broadcast their terror to the rest of the fleet. They told their fellow warriors about the nightmare weapon that made them hear their own deaths. They spoke of the humans who fought like demons and never gave up. The message spread through the Vorthak fleet like a virus. Fear infected ship after ship, crew after crew. The perfect military machine began to break down from the inside. But the humans were not done. Dr. Harin had been working on something that would change the war forever. She had discovered that the genetic changes in human soldiers were not random. They were directed, purposeful, as if humanity was evolving into something specifically designed to fight the Vorthak. "We're becoming their perfect enemy," she told. "Jinha, our species is adapting to counter everything they do. How is that possible?" "I think it's because we're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for evolution. We're fighting to become something better than what we were." Around the galaxy, the news spread. The humans had not only survived the Vorthak assault, they had turned it into an opportunity. They had used the war to become stronger, faster, smarter. They had evolved in real time into a species that could match the galaxy's apex predators, the Vorthak Empire, which had seemed invincible just months before, was now crumbling. Their conquered worlds were in rebellion. Their fleets were retreating. Their warriors were broken by fear. And in the depths of space, humanity prepared for the final phase of their impossible war. They had gone from prey to predator, from victims to victors, from a forgotten species to the galaxy's new apex power. The Vorthak had wanted to teach humanity about fear. Instead, they had taught them about strength. And now they would learn what happened when humans stopped being afraid and started being dangerous. The stars had seen many horrors, but none like the Vorthak Empire. Their black ships moved through space like hungry shadows, bringing death to every world they touched. For 50 years they had conquered system after system. No army could stop them, no weapon could hurt them. No species could match their power. Admiral Kethmar stood in the command center of his flagship, watching the holographic display of their latest victory. The Zellian homeworld burned below them. Another species had fallen, another civilization had ended. The screams of the dying had stopped hours ago, but the smoke still rose from the cities. "Admiral," his second-in-command hissed through mandibles that clicked with satisfaction. "The Galactic Federation has sent another surrender message. They offer us the Rigel system without a fight." Kethmar's 4 eyes glowed with cruel pleasure. His chitinous armor reflected the light from the burning planet. The Vorthak had evolved on a world of constant war. Their bodies were living weapons. Their minds were designed for conquest. Their hearts knew only the joy of victory. "Good," he rumbled in his deep voice. "Fear spreads faster than our ships. Soon, the entire galaxy will bow before us." The holographic map showed their empire in red. 17 star systems, billions of dead, countless species extinct. The Vorthak had done in 50 years what other empires took centuries to achieve. They were perfect killers, but there was something that bothered Kethmar. A small dot on the Map remained unmarked. A tiny system at the edge of their territory, the Sol system. It contained a small blue world called Earth. What do we know about this system? He asked, pointing at the dot. His aide pulled up the files. Very little, Admiral. The Galactic Federation contacted them decades ago. They called the species humans. The Federation marked them as primitive. No threat, no value. They were forgotten. Kethmar studied the data. The humans had no faster-than-light travel. No energy weapons, no shields. Their bodies were soft and weak. They lived on only one world. They fought among themselves constantly. The Federation had dismissed them as worthless. "Show me their world," he ordered. The hologram changed to show Earth, a blue and green marble spinning in space. Cities glowed on the night side. Clouds swirled over oceans. It looked peaceful, harmless. They multiply quickly, the aide noted. Over 8 billion of them now. They have spread to a few nearby moons and planets, but only with crude chemical. Rockets, Kethmar laughed. It was a sound like grinding metal. 8 billion insects on a garden world. How pathetic. But something nagged at him. The humans had been contacted by the Federation 50 years ago. They had been given basic technology, star charts, knowledge of other species. Yet they had done nothing with it. They had remained on their little world, fighting their little wars. "Sir," another officer approached. "Our scouts have returned from the outer systems. They report something unusual. Speak." The humans have built mining stations on several asteroids. They have small colonies on 2 moons. They are expanding. Kethmar's eyes narrowed. Expanding? Without permission. It appears so, Admiral. Their technology is still primitive, but they are moving beyond their homeworld. The bridge fell silent. Every Vorthic warrior knew the rules. No species expanded without the Empire's permission. No world was colonized without tribute. No race grew stronger without serving the Vorthic. These humans had broken the rules. They had expanded in secret. They had grown without asking. This was an insult that could not be ignored. "How many of them are there now?" Kethmar asked. "Perhaps 10 million beyond their homeworld. Small numbers, but they are building more ships. More stations, more colonies." Kethmar's rage began to build. The Vorthak had conquered species with billions of soldiers. They had destroyed fleets with thousands of ships. They had ended civilizations that had ruled for millennia. And now these weak, forgotten humans dared to expand without permission? "Admiral," his aide whispered, "they are so primitive. Surely they pose no threat." "No threat?" Kethmar's voice was deadly quiet. "They have forgotten their place. They have forgotten that this galaxy belongs to the Vorthak. They have forgotten that we decide who lives and who dies." He turned to the communications officer. "Open a channel to their homeworld. Send the standard message." The officer's claws clicked across the controls. "Channel open, Admiral." Kethmar's image would appear on every screen on Earth, his 4 eyes burning with hatred, his armor gleaming with the blood of 1,000 worlds, his voice carrying the weight of 50 years of conquest. "Humans of Earth," he began. "I am Admiral Kethmar of the Vorthak Empire. Your species has been judged. You have expanded without permission. You have grown without tribute. You have forgotten your place in this galaxy." He paused, letting his words sink in. On Earth, billions of humans would be watching, trembling, realizing that their peaceful existence was about to end. "You have 72 hours to surrender. Dismantle your colonies, destroy your ships, submit to Vorthak rule. Do this, and you will be allowed to live as slaves. Refuse, and your species will be extinct before your sun sets again." The message ended, the channel closed. Kethmar turned back to his officers. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "All ships, all warriors. We will make an example of these humans. The galaxy will remember what happens to those who forget their place." His second-in-command clicked with excitement. "How long do you think they will resist, Admiral?" Kethmar studied the image of Earth again. So small, so blue. So fragile? 8 billion humans living on a world that could be cracked like an egg. They had no weapons that could hurt the Vorthak. No ships that could outrun them. No technology that could save them. They will surrender within hours, he said confidently. They are weak, they are divided, they are cowards. They will beg for mercy before we even reach their system? The fleet began to move. Hundreds of black ships, each one capable of destroying. A moon, thousands of Vorthak warriors, each one a perfect killing machine. The most feared army in the galaxy heading toward a small blue world that had dared to forget its place. Admiral Kethmer smiled. This would be their easiest conquest. Yet, the humans would learn what every other species had learned. The Vorthak were inevitable. The Vorthak were unstoppable. The Vorthak were death itself. In 72 hours, the humans would be extinct. Another species would join the countless others in the graveyard of the galaxy. Another world would burn. Under Vorthak rule, or so he thought, but Admiral Kethmer had made one fatal mistake. He had assumed that being forgotten meant being weak. He had assumed that being primitive meant being helpless. He had assumed that being small meant being afraid. He was about to learn the truth about humanity, and that truth would haunt the Vorthak Empire forever.